This is John Nichols of The Nation magazine, and you're listening to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour.
Stand up, you've been sitting way too long.
Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. My name is Steve Scrovan, along with my co-host David Feldman. Hello, trusty co-host.
Hello.
And Hannah is still out, but Francesco DeSantis is here in her place. Hello, Francesco.
Hello, Steve.
And we have the man of the hour, Ralph Nader, as always. Hello, Ralph.
Hello, everybody. And the show itself is pretty special. I don't think you've heard the kind of guests that we're going to have, so stay tuned.
Full disclosure, today's first guest is a personal friend of mine. Her name is Diana Kastenbaum. Diana lives in Batavia, New York, which is in a very large ruby red district in the western part of the state. And Diana did what Ralph has been calling all of us to do over the years. She organized a town hall and summoned her congressperson to meet with her constituents. When Diana told me the story, I said, we need to have you on the show. We need to amplify this citizen action. In Diana's district, the congressperson is Claudia Tenney, a four-term representative. I don't want to say she's a fierce MAGA Republican, but she's the one who recently introduced legislation to make Donald Trump's birthday a national holiday. Well, they had a great turnout for the event. Both Democrats and Republicans showed up, but Claudia Tenney was a no-show. They held the meeting anyway, with guest speakers and citizens in the audience addressing their questions and comments to a cardboard cutout of Tenney. Where was Claudia Tenney during this town hall? Apparently, she thought it was more important to go with a delegation of Republicans for a tour of the now infamous Secot prison in El Salvador. We look forward to hearing Diana tell her story of how she put it all together, what happened during, and the fallout afterwards. Next up, we welcome back Washington Post tech reporter Geoffrey Fowler. Geoffrey last appeared on the program about 2.5 years ago to explain all the ways our smart devices were gathering information about us. Our garage doors, our soap dispensers, our vacuum cleaners, and even our toilets. This time, Geoffrey Fowler is back to discuss his latest report about how Meta promised parents it would automatically shield teens from harmful content on Instagram. But tests conducted by Mr. Fowler and a group of Gen Z users found that it fails spectacularly. Then to round out the program, we welcome back Norman Solomon of Roots Action. He's going to tell us about the emergency meeting that progressive Democrats had called for at the Democratic National Committee. Roots Action and Progressive Democrats of America have sponsored a petition with 7,000 signers warning that, quote, the Democratic Party has failed to confront the urgency of this perilous moment for the future of the United States, unquote. The petition contends that the DNC, the governing body of the Democratic Party, quote, should convene an emergency meeting of all its members, fully open to the public, as soon as possible. Waiting till the next regular meeting in late summer would be irresponsible and unacceptable, unquote. Also, at the very end, Ralph has some choice words about what Donald Trump should be doing for Gaza. And as always, somewhere in the middle, we'll check in with their ever-diligent corporate crime reporter, Russell Mokhiber. But first, let's hear about what happened when a citizen summoned their member of Congress to a town hall. David?
Diana Kastenbaum lives in Batavia, New York, where she's been an owner in her family business, Pinnacle Manufacturing, for over 45 years. In 2014, she became the CEO of the company, making her one of only a handful of female CEOs in the manufacturing field of tool and die casting in all of North America. In addition, she owned her own tech consulting company for 25 years. She's devoted herself to numerous national political endeavors, and in 2016, ran for New York's 27th congressional district. Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, Diana Kastenbaum.
Well, thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, listeners, this is going to be a real treat because we have a very serious civic activist here focusing on Congress the way we've talked about for several years now, that it's all Congress. That's the tool for people to turn around the executive branch, get better judges, and have a beneficial impact at the state and local level. And we have repeatedly said, Diana, that there are 535 men and women who put their shoes on like we do every day, and they have absorbed the delegated power under our Constitution of the citizens in this country, and for the most part, betrayed that power, turned the Congress into a tool for 1,500 or so corporations against the many health, safety, economic, and other interests of the American people, and that both parties are culpable, although at various times the GOP is worse than the Democrats on Capitol Hill, which is the case at the present time. Now, you have independently focused on your incumbent, Representative Claudia Tenney, a Republican, and tried to get her to show up at town meetings. You've organized these town meetings very, very proficiently. All kinds of people who showed up. I mean, you had about 300 people at one town meeting, which is really quite impressive given the withdrawal of civic engagement around the country. Tell us what your experience is. What did you have the town meeting for? You invited the representative. How did she react? How did the citizens react to her reaction?
I'm going to take a couple steps back to right at the election. After the election, we all, I think Democrats just took a long, much needed rest. And the holidays came along and we were discouraged. And it wasn't until January 20th. And when those executive orders started to come out, and I started to get really, really nervous. And it woke me up from my hibernation here and in Western New York. So I actually had many sleepless nights, and I reached out to some friends. They weren't sleeping too. They were worried. And so we decided to, we have to do something about it. And because the Congress was now Republican, the executive branch was Republican, the courts, we didn't know if they were going to uphold the rule of law. And it really came down to what we felt were the citizens. And I put a post out there that, everybody was doing their own thing. Some people, one of my very good friends, as a matter of fact, she got people together who just needed to be comforted. They were pretty upset. And then some were very angry. And she got like 50 people in her house on the first meeting. They all brought potluck and they decided they all needed to do something. And so somebody would say, well, I'm going to go to county legislature meetings. I'm going to write postcards. I'm going to do marches. Some were interested in town halls. And it sort of took off from there. I posted to my public Facebook page that I would be interested in doing town halls. And suddenly I got people who said, yeah, they'd help me with it. So that was in February. And there were a lot of us throughout this district. Now, this district is very gerrymandered. It goes all the way from Lewiston in Niagara County. It's called the Lake District, all the way across Lake Ontario, up to the St. Lawrence Seaway, to Watertown, and all the way across the lake. But it skips over Rochester. And so it covers the Finger Lakes too. Hence, we call it the Lake District. And it abuts the North Country where Stefanik's district is. So Claudia Tenney, she didn't live in this district initially, and she ran. She got elected twice now.
This is a red Republican district.
It is hugely red. This was the one that the Democrats just throw away and just said, here, that's yours, Republicans. And if you look at it, it just is, it's a very odd-shaped district. When I ran for Congress in New York 27, it was a block, and Batavia was right in the middle. And I was in 1 hour from just virtually any corner of it. This one, it takes, I'm going clear across the state. So it's really huge to travel that district for anybody.
When you're saying the Democrats shaped it as a giveaway, the Democrats controlling the legislature in Albany gerrymandered the state, and they basically carved out this area as a giveaway to the Republicans. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. And also when David Wagenhauser ran against Claudia Tenney last year, that was still in the courts. And it only got redistricted again just, I believe, last summer. And they took away one city that would have gone, hopefully it would have gone Democrat, Auburn, New York, and put it into another Democratic district. So the final district was, I believe last summer was when they finally had the final lines drawn. So it's very red. And Wyoming County, which was in my district in New York 27 and is still in this district, I believe they were one of the solid red counties in the nation who almost totally voted for Trump. I don't have the percentages out, but I know they made that list. So yes, it's
So you were running uphill with your town meeting, and you were very surprised at the turnout, and they weren't all Democrats, right?
Yeah. So we wound up, a lot of us were working in our own little bubbles. And finally, somebody got together and said, let's do a Zoom. Let's not work at cross purposes. And so we all got together and we formed this group, myself and others, and Scott Comegis. He's actually running for New York State Senate next year. And we have been doing these town halls. And the first one we had was in Geneva, New York. And it was March 18th. And it was all on healthcare. So we had 4 healthcare panelists there. We knew that she probably wasn't going to show up, even though we hand delivered invitations as we do for every one of our town halls. And the reason is because in previous experiences, when running against Chris Collins, he would say, I never got anything. So we actually take the invitation. When I was planning the town hall in Batavia, hand delivered the invitation with somebody to her Canandaigua office, and that person filmed me. So we had to go to that extent because I didn't want her to come back and saying she never got it. So we had a cardboard cutout of Claudia, very nice picture of her. And we had our panelists in 4 chairs on healthcare. And then we had her off to the side. And Scott actually was the moderator on that. We thought, well, I heard that they thought initially maybe, I don't know, they'd get maybe 100 people. And it was close to, or if not over, 400 people filled the Opera House in Geneva. And I know they weren't all Democrats. So that was the beginning. And the next one, we wanted one every month. So my Batavia Town Hall was up next. And, it's been a little hard planning these things because not many venues, it's hard to find a venue, not many places want us to hold these town halls in, probably because there was such bad press, I guess, people yelling and shouting and all of that. So places that I thought we could easily get into, it turned out we couldn't. And I finally got the Art Community Center in Batavia, which works with disabled people, and they were wonderful. Now, the house only held 300, and I didn't know if I was going to get 300 people. It was a stormy, rainy, actually we had snow that night, and I thought, oh, nobody's going to come out. So it was to start at 7:00, and 6:30 people started coming in. And Ralph, I actually got a lump in my throat when I saw these people come through the door with their signs. I really got choked up about it because I thought, wow, these people are really coming here to do their civic duty. And it was a very moving experience. So in our town hall, we decided to focus on 4 different issues: veterans, healthcare, farmers, agriculture, and education. So we had experts in those fields, and then I moderated it. And it was also very difficult to get people to come and speak on a panel. I couldn't get anybody from our local veterans because they were told not to speak. Social Security, we put a feeler out to them. We assumed that they were told not to speak. So it came down to a lot of retired vets who showed up, and my vet on the panel was retired. So somebody in the education system, I had a retired administrator came. So it was not an easy thing to put together.
What was the reaction? Did any staff of the representative show up at all?
No, nobody showed up. Nobody responded either. I mean, I asked for RSVPs, nobody responded.
Did you get an indignant reaction from the audience about being snubbed like that by the representative whose power has been delegated by them to her?
Yeah, people booed. Yeah, when we entered, the cardboard figure and said that she didn't show up or respond, people were not happy about it. But what was most moving and inspiring, but also very, very, very sad in a way, was the stories. I set out up front, we have experts here, we can answer questions, and we're willing to do so. However, we want to hear your stories also. So it gave room to people who wanted to share what was going on in their lives. And that was the most impactful thing that I think made a real difference on the audience, because you couldn't listen to these people who were hurting so much in their lives, and with the possibility of things being taken away, how much they were going to suffer in rural America here. And you couldn't listen to these people and not feel for them. One veteran stood up. He actually had to pause for a moment because he got choked up, and he was most upset because the veterans' suicide hotline was taken away. And that made him, it was, how can you do this to serve our country? How cruel is that?
Did you find they went the next step and focused on Trump and the Republicans, or they were just airing their grievances?
Well, they were airing the grievances, but we all knew where the cuts came from. There was no action per se, except, they gave voice to it and everybody heard it. We didn't have any, well, we're going to do this, this, and this at these things. It was just for people to ask their questions and tell their stories. And I think that's sort of where we are now in town halls, is to trying to get our friends and our neighbors and our local communities to hear what will happen, what is happening to the people in their communities. And there were Republicans there, and they didn't yell or shout or anything like that. There was no disruption, but everybody, I think, they stayed till the last moment, and everybody listened to these people and shared their stories. There was another woman, she was intersex, and she got up, and I identify her as a woman because she used her name in that and identified that way. And she was an intersex person, and she got up, and she was 47, and she said there's not many people that live long that are intersex, and she said she's lived till 47, but she's had to take hormones and drugs and all of that, and at different times those drugs, she's not been able to get them. And she was also in a study at the University of Rochester at Strong Hospital, and she wasn't even sure if her study was going to continue. She couldn't get a hold of anybody at that particular point in time. And she got a huge round of applause, and people listened and they empathized with her. But, the courage it took for that woman to stand up and to tell her story in this town that's 15,000 people only, that I just couldn't get over it. And it just was very inspiring in that respect.
Some quick questions, probably on the minds of our listeners. Was the press there, and did they cover it? Number two,
yes.
Did you video it? Did you videotape it? And number three, were there any state or local elected officials there?
So we did have local press. We had our local paper, and it also has a adjunct paper in another county. And then we have an online paper and a video news service. Those were all local, and they covered it. But also Rochester station came in to cover it too. So we had press on the local internet and in the paper, but we also had TV in Rochester.
And did you videotape it yourself?
Yes, and we videotaped it, and we said we were videotaping. Every one of these have been videotaped. Scott, actually, my co-partner in this, he actually called Tenny's office and he said, we're sending this to you. How do you want to receive it? And they said, let me get back to you. We don't know what format we want it in. And that was their way of really not ever getting back to us. So yeah, she didn't, I don't even think she's seen it. When we had
local officials?
Yes. So interestingly enough, mine, and I can speak from the Batavia town hall we did, I had said that leaders in the community who were adept at speaking on various subjects. And we purposely didn't want, and Millie Tomedy Pepper, she worked with me on the Batavia Town Hall, and we specifically didn't want any elected officials on the panel, because then it sort of makes it a Democratic thing or
No, I mean in the audience.
Yes. So Mark Polenkars, who is the Erie County executive, showed up at our town hall. I know Mark, and we talked beforehand, and I said, do you mind if I introduce you? And he said, yeah, no, that's fine. And he sat right up front. So in my introduction, I introduced him and I also said, I'm sure Mark can jump in if there's anything that he might be able to answer. And he did. He actually was able to answer a couple questions and jumped in on it. And he got a warm response from everybody. In fact, one woman stood up, Beth Carr, and she thanked him because as she looked around the room, and she knows she's lived here many, many years, and she did not see any of our county legislature there. She did not see any of our city council people there. So she said, thank you for coming because I don't even see anybody here. When I guess the Daily News approached them as to why they didn't come, they said, well, we only come to things like that if we're planning it or specifically working on it, I guess.
You've done something that's quite unique, and your representative rebuffed you, didn't show up. You've done 3 or 4 of these. What's the next step?
Well, we have another one. We were going to do one a month, and now it looks like we're doing 2 a month. We have one coming up next week in Lockport. That's our 4th one, so it'll be 2 in May here. Eventually, I think what's going to happen is we will continue these town halls, but hopefully we'll have a candidate, and that candidate, we'll invite any, but that candidate can come and sit and answer questions too. And hopefully the candidate will have some answers as to what we're going to do.
As a seasoned organizer, did you collect the names of people there so you could stay in touch with them and they can stay in touch with you?
We didn't make them sign anything. Not at the Batavia one, we didn't. We didn't make them. We had some pamphlets and stuff like that, but they may have at others, but I know at the Batavia one, we did not.
Why not?
Actually, I was trying to get people in the room. I didn't want to know if people wanted their names collected. And so, but good idea.
We found this out in audiences all over the country. If you don't have a clipboard and have it pass from one to another, and they can take a pass and not sign it, or they can sign it. You don't leave much behind.
No, you're right. You're right. Also, the other thing was the demographics of this. They're mostly people who are retired or close to retirement. And our county, we see a lot of our young people leave for Buffalo and Rochester and other places to go to the bigger cities to get work. And we don't have a lot of young people. There's a lot of young people organizing marches and that, I noticed. But when you look across the audience, you see a lot of gray-haired people. And that really is sort of, in rural America, that's sort of where we are. But I have to say, to tell you a story, there were these 5 young women. They must have been in their 20s. And they came, and one was very excited. And she said, this is my first town hall. I've never been to a town hall before. And she goes, when we go to the marches and we go to the county legislature, and they all had knitting bags. They pulled out their knitting. They sit at the county legislature meetings and the town halls, and they sit and they knit. And I thought, well, there's some sort of literary symbolism there. But they were really wonderful. And it was so good to see them getting involved. And, it's how do we get these young people here, too, involved in this? And
we're talking with Diana Kastenbaum, who is a CEO of her family tool and die business, who has had a long history of civic activism and also political engagement. I asked you about the next step. Well, it turns out in the district next to you, represented by Representative Stefanik, who is one of Donald Trump's favorites and was nominated to be the ambassador to the United Nations until Trump changed his mind and told her to stay in the district because he didn't want to lose it in the next election. There is a group of citizens who are organizing what they call a Congress watchdog group. And they're quite sophisticated. They are inviting her to all kinds of events, and she's not responding. She's telling them no. So one of their tactics is to make her keep saying no, no to various groups in the district, service groups, civic groups, charity groups, educational groups, to build up an image of her as the congresswoman who says no. And they're using very personal interactions like this because she won't show up at any town meetings. So that's a dead end. It's a good idea maybe for you to contact these people. One of their advisors is Peter Lavinia, who is a political science professor at one of the state universities in that area. This is by way of saying, trying to make arrogant, remote, smug members of Congress accountable after being unaccountable for years and not having very competitive reelection races requires going to the next dimension in very targeted manner. Another technique they're using is one at a time. They ask her, why are you against raising the minimum wage? Why are you against cracking down on corporate crooks ripping off people? Why are you against universal health care? And she doesn't answer. They put out a press release, in effect saying she is so arrogant that she doesn't want to interact with very popular reforms in her district. And they give indications of how popular it is, and they give indications of how necessary this legislation is. So all this begins to build up pressure week after week. And that's what we're trying to get underway all over the country. I mean, people just don't know what their power is. They have the sovereign power, and they totally outnumber the donors to these members of Congress in terms of voters. And a lot of these issues are left-right supported issues like minimum wage, extension of the child tax credit, cracking down on corporate crooks, raising taxes on undertaxed super rich and the corporation. These come in from 75 to 85%. And that's an overwhelming endorsement to throw up against these arrogant corporate Republicans or corporate Democrats. What's your reaction?
I think that's great, and it's a great idea. I think I'm going to try to get it. If you can give me Peter's number, I'd be happy to call him and have a conversation with him. I'm going to go up in a couple of weeks. I'll be up in the North Country. I was hoping to meet with Blake. I wanted to see him. I think he's running a very, very good campaign. And he's a local farmer up there against Stefanik. So maybe I can meet with Peter while I'm there.
Yeah, he'd be very happy to meet with you. And they have a letterhead, a name of an organization. And members of Congress have never experienced this kind of aggregating intensity and diversification of issues. They're ripe to be challenged and replaced. Let's go to Steve.
Diana, tell us more about Claudia Tenney's response. First of all, tell us where she was when you did your town hall, and then how she responded to it. And then I know you responded back. So tell us a little bit about that back and forth.
We try to do these town halls when they're on recess, so they don't have an excuse to say, I'm in Washington. So we didn't know where she was going to be. But then suddenly we saw that she had a photo. I think it was it the Oswego County News? Some news in our district. They posted a photo of her at SICA in El Salvador at the prison the same day that our town hall was. And you saw some of the representatives, with their thumbs up in front of the bars with the prisoners in the back. I didn't see one of those pictures of her, but she did pose with this Republican contingent. And so that's where she was. And so she didn't show up to our town hall, but she felt it was necessary for some reason to go there, obviously to curry favor with Trump. So when our local newspaper, actually, which is a pretty conservative newspaper, they poked her a bit and they wanted to know if she wanted to give any statements or anything like that. And she wrote back, her staff member wrote, that we are only going to say this once and for the last time. And it's out there. It's been posted by the Batavia Daily News. And it pretty much said that you have done nothing for us. I have been at every town hall, all the things that I did in Congress over, the past few years for you, and you've never said anything about it. And the paper actually went back and they had it all documented, how many times they had spoken to her and they had given her press. And at the end, she called us, me, I guess everybody who have planned these town halls, but specifically in Batavia, that we were outsiders. We did not live in her district. And we were brought in to be, I guess, disruptive or whatever she said. So I wrote back to her in the Daily News and a letter to the editor. And I said, we were not far left activists, like she called us, traveling into the district to hold fake town halls. That was her quote. And I said, I was born and raised here. I live here. I planned this town hall. And having a town hall does not disenfranchise me as a citizen. in this country, no matter how hard you would like to try to do so. And I said that I told her about the town hall and that about 400 people came to the one in Geneva, and we would love to have her come. And there were also comments on various posts that George Soros somehow is backing this, paying us and backing us. And I said, the town hall to rent the Ark costs $275. $225, but $50 to have the Ark people set up and take down the chairs. So $275 total. And I laid out the money and I put in money, and basically we passed the hat. So everybody, chipped in to pay for it. And I told her that in the letter. We were not George Soros. We are not paid by him. We took our own money, just as people in communities do.
Even the town meetings that the Republican incumbents in Congress hold back in their district are now becoming very rare because people are coming in left, right, conservative, liberal, expressing their outrage at Trump's disastrous policies that affect them very personally where they live, work, and raise their families. And so now the Republican National Committee has advised the Republican members of Congress not to hold in-person town meetings and to hold virtual town meetings where they're sitting at their desk in their office on Capitol Hill, or not hold town meetings at all. So they are pursuing a disastrous course of ignoring and snubbing people.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are going to react adversely to them. Well, we're out of time. We've been interviewing public citizen extraordinaire and local family manufacturer, Diana Kastenbaum, who is going to pioneer new ways of holding members of Congress accountable. And whatever succeeds, Diana, we will try to diffuse around the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ralph. Nice speaking with you.
We've been speaking with Diana Kastenbaum. We will link to the accounts of her town hall at ralphnaderradiohour.com. When we come back, Washington Post tech reporter Geoffrey Fowler joins us to tell us about how Instagram is sending a lot of hinky stuff to teenagers. Now let's check in with our corporate crime reporter, Russell Mokhiber.
From the National Press Building in Washington, D.C., this is your Corporate Crime Reporter Morning Minute for Friday, May 30, 2025. I'm Russell Mokhiber. Families who lost loved ones reacted with anger at the sudden turnaround in allowing Boeing to withdraw from its earlier guilty plea in a criminal fraud case announced by the Department of Justice. The department said it does not intend to proceed with a criminal fraud trial against Boeing regarding two crashes of the 737 MAX 8 aircraft 6 years ago, killing 346 people. Many family members have repeatedly chastised the department for not working in the public interest. The department said last week that instead of proceeding with the criminal trial against Boeing, it will instead recommend to the judge a non-prosecution agreement. The families were told just a week ago of the department's intent to drop all criminal charges against Boeing. For the Corporate Crime Reporter, I'm Russell Mokhiber.
Thank you, Russell. Welcome back to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. I'm Steve Scrovan, along with David Feldman, Francesco DeSantis, and Ralph. Meta promised parents it would automatically shield teens from harmful content on Instagram. Tests by young users, and our next guest found it failed. David?
Geoffrey Fowler is the Washington Post's technology columnist. Before joining the Post, he spent 16 years with the Wall Street Journal, writing about consumer technology, Silicon Valley, national affairs, and China. Welcome back to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, Geoffrey Fowler.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Geoffrey. Our listeners should know that if you know a lot about tech or if you don't know much about tech, you can't do better than to read Geoffrey Fowler's articles in the Washington Post. They're very clear, and they're usually first out of the box. And on May 18th, you had a column in the Washington Post called Generation Z Users and a Dad Tested Instagram Teen Accounts. Their feeds were shocking. What was shocking?
What was shocking was the content of stuff that Instagram has decided to recommend and show to kids as young as 13 and 14, even though last year they promised a whole new system that would, by default, automatically make sure that lots of sexual, racist, drug, you name it kinds of content would be automatically filtered out from young people. And that headline that you read, I am the dad being mentioned. I'm a dad now. I got 2 little kids. And what I did is I performed an experiment, which is often at the core of what I do in my columns. I performed an experiment on Instagram where I set up one of those accounts for a teenager that Instagram had promised us would be given special protections. And I just used it for, frankly, it took as little as 10 minutes for me to swipe through and see what kinds of stuff Instagram was going to show this kid. And oh boy, it really went off the rails quickly. And my experiment was repeating some experiments done by a group of Gen Z tech activists who kind of did their own tests of Instagram teams and also found that it very quickly took a dark turn.
Well, Facebook, now called Meta, led by Mark Zuckerberg, keeps doing this. They keep going up to Congress and reassuring Congress that they're going to change the ways they've been exposing these youngsters. They put full-page ads in the New York Times and Washington Post saying they have all kinds of algorithms for the parents to shield their teenagers and pre-teenagers from this kind of content. And they keep violating their public assurances. It's like there's a dark commercial villain inside this company that does whatever makes the most money for them, whatever gets the most data from these innocent children in order to sell to advertisers or who knows else around the world to make Zuckerberg even richer. When you did this as a dad, you focused also on not just the dangers these children face with bad people on the internet, but an app's recommendation algorithm, to quote you, which decides what your kids see and demonstrates the frightening habit of taking them in dark direction, end quote. Can you tell us what impact your article had?
Yeah, well, you make 2 really good points here. First of all, Meta, the company formerly known as Facebook, has a knack for making all kinds of promises right before it's about to be regulated. And in fact, in this case, the company came out with these and debuted these teen accounts right at the verge of a new federal law that would require social media companies to do a better job of designing systems for kids. In fact, the Senate had passed this law and the House was about to have a hearing the very next day to pick it up. And then Meta says, oh, no, you don't need to regulate us. We'll finally make our products better. So that's where this came from. And so, yes, to your point, I think it's really important for me as a journalist and for other civic society organizations to hold the company accountable. Are they really doing what they are claiming? And on your other point as well, I think this is a really important distinction here, right? So there are many different kinds of harms that kids potentially face on the internet, right? There are really creepy adults out there who are trying to exploit children, everything from, exploiting them for money or photos or even kidnap them. And that is one major source of concern. But there's another source of concern, and one that really has come into focus in recent years, particularly after the disclosures of the Facebook whistleblower, Frances Haugen, where we've learned that the way that these apps are designed, the way that Instagram and Facebook are designed, has an impact on the mental health of young people, because these companies are deciding with their algorithms what kids look at. And the values that they're building into these algorithms, into these systems, are not values that I think you or I would share, Ralph. These are values that are about shock and going to extremes. And so, when you give this to a very young person, we've learned and we have evidence that it hurts the body image of a young person. It gives them a very twisted sense of what is a normal conversation about sex or race or drugs. When I did this test, again, after using my test account for a very short period of time, my feed was filled with, I would say, was obsessed with alcoholism. Again, I told Instagram that this account belonged to a teenager, but it became obsessed with alcoholism, a product called Zyn, which is a tobacco product, which the company claims is only marketed to people over 35. Again, this was a teenager account. So yeah, there's some really strange and unhealthy values baked into the choices these apps, and particularly Instagram, are making about what to show our kids.
Tell us a little more about the whistleblower who used to work for Facebook and testified before Congress, Frances Haugen. And she's still at it. What is she exposing?
Yeah, she is still at it. I mean, what she's been calling for is regulating these tech companies. She doesn't necessarily, I mean, there are smart people in this space who disagree on exactly how you should go about that. As I'm sure listeners know, right now, Meta is facing a big antitrust trial, which threatens to split it up and possibly even force it to sell off Instagram, a company that it bought a couple of years ago. But her whistleblowing showed the world that Facebook and its senior executives knew that the choices they were making of what to show kids were having a negative impact on those kids, particularly when it comes to stuff like body image. And that is just a really powerful thing to be able to say, that not only is it happening, but the company knew it was happening and made different choices anyway to allow it to continue.
Tell us about Accountable Tech, which is trying to do something about all this.
Yeah, there is a sort of a new genre of civil society organizations that is trying to, as the name of this one implies, hold big tech companies accountable for the decisions that they make and the way that they design their products. And what I particularly like about Accountable Tech, and it has a sister organization that's focused on Gen Z called Design It For Us. What I particularly like about their approach is that it's a little bit similar to mine as a journalist, in that they are taking these products and they're testing them. They're saying, here's what really happens when you use it. And does that live up to what these companies are promising us, or what we think as users that they might be up to? And often we find it does not, and that there is very little accountability. And so then that begs the question, well, how do we make these companies more accountable? What kinds of laws should we pass that might help? That said, there has been very little movement, at least on the federal level, on passing laws to address many of these questions. Frankly, most of the action has been in the states, particularly here in California, where I am, where, thanks to a law out here, we now, as consumers, have some privacy rights online. They're not ideal, they're not perfect, but we at least have some. And California has also been sort of pushing ahead on requirements to protect kids online. So it's an important line of work, and it seems like Congress can't get anything done.
Well, these companies, let's face it, they are profiteering electronic child molesters, and they do it day after day after day without stopping. They lie to regulators and to legislators that they're going to clean up their act, and they never do, and they still get away with it. If individuals did what Zuckerberg and Facebook Meta do every day, they would be prosecuted, jailed, they'd be put away. There are kids who are committing suicide. They're susceptible to serious mental health damage. Their physical health is being undermined by these advertisers, feeding them junk food, junk drink, violent programming. This is a serious assault on the family. And
Absolutely.
They've got these kids cornered, looking at these screens, mesmerized 5, 6, 7 hours a day, separating themselves from family, community, and nature. This has never happened. Nothing close to it has ever happened in terms of corporations grabbing the attention of these children and undermining parental guidance. How do these corporations get away with it when a peeping Tom would be caught and prosecuted if the peeping Tom just did it one night?
Yeah, I totally agree. And at the very base level, which is like the most basic level, is what I was trying to do in my column, is hold the company accountable for the product that it said it made. It told parents, we've got your back. We are going to protect your kids by default in the following ways. And does it even live up to that? That's like that base level that, like, and frankly, even the FTC ought to be able to sue a company for violating. But you raise a bigger question, and I will say there are smart, decent people who disagree about the best way to protect kids on the internet. People whose views I normally turn to and trust on issues like privacy and security online. Some of them think that it is a bad idea for either the government or for corporations and their products to be in the business of, quote unquote, trying to censor the experience that kids have online. You and I might not necessarily take that point of view, but they say that when you try to do that, you end up having to do more surveillance because you have to know how old the person is using the app or using the website. And then they say that you end up sort of creating an experience that any smart kid knows how to get around, right? Like if you might try to block the sexual content or the tobacco content on Instagram, but you're not actually going to stop a smart kid from going on the internet and finding that stuff. So there is that argument out there. Where I disagree with it, and I bet you would too, is that there is a big difference between censorship in the sense of like not allowing a kid to talk about or explore their sexuality at all, like a complete censorship, versus the decisions that these companies are building into their apps about what to proactively show kids, what to fill their attention and time with. And that is a very different thing. That is actually much closer to what a media company would do, or what a teacher would do, or a parent. And I think on those levels, I think we can make different demands for companies about the choices they make in their products used by teens.
Thank you for this instructive interview, Geoffrey Fowler of the Washington Post.
Glad to be here.
We've been speaking with Geoffrey Fowler. We will link to his work at ralphnaderradiohour.com.
Stand up, stand up.
With an approval rating in the Democratic Party at an all-time low, progressives in the party have called for an emergency meeting with the DNC. Our next guest will fill us in. David?
Norman Solomon is co-founder of rootsaction.org. Welcome back to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, Norman Solomon.
Glad to be here. Thanks.
Welcome back, Norman. Tell us why you want the Democratic National Committee in Washington, D.C. to declare an emergency meeting, and what has been their response?
Well, the DNC, so to speak, owns the Democratic Party. It runs and actually is in charge of policy for the party. And it's been basically in a rut like a turtle, and that doesn't work. And so it's bad enough, it's horrific enough what the Trump regime is doing, but that problem is compounded by the fact that the people at the top of the hierarchy of the Democratic Party seem to be treating this as business as usual, and that's a terrible, awful combination.
Well, you've joined Roots Action, which is a nonprofit citizen group, has joined with the Progressive Democrats of America to send a petition to the new head of the Democratic National Committee, Ken Martin, who pledged when he was placed in his new position he was going to shake things up. But by my standards, he hasn't shaken anything up very much at all. When was this petition sent to him? And when did you want this emergency meeting? And what has been the response?
Well, we want the emergency meeting as soon as possible. The petition was sent to Ken Martin, and he acknowledged receiving it several days before this executive committee of the DNC met on the 30th of May. And it included, I think, notably 1,500 individual comments that signers wrote. And it's very eloquent, heartrending, and often outraged that the party is simply treating this as another election or off election year. And the response basically has been, we know what we're doing. And I think what's most key is that there's no evidence that the Democratic National Committee or the National Party as a whole is responding to this unprecedented assault on democratic structures by the Republican regime in any way different than before. We're getting a lot of rhetoric. We're not getting a response that indicates grassroots activism is, and it is truly the only way to, in an efficacious manner, respond to this quasi-dictatorship that's being imposed. So it's really a classic conflict between a top-down elitist approach to running the Democratic Party, which has been true for decades, and the only real salvation, so to speak, for saving a democratic infrastructure of this country, which is to mobilize people from the grassroots. And this is where Roots Action, and I think PDA as well, is demanding, that's why we're demanding, hey, get out of this turtle rut. It's not going to work simply pretending that this is another kind of a regime, another kind of administration.
Well, you're supported by Congressman Ro Khanna, who is an up-and-coming member of Congress, has designs on becoming a leader someday, if not running for president. He hails from Silicon Valley in California. What has been the position of the Progressive Caucus in the House of Representatives that has over 80 members from the Democratic Party? As part of it, and it has a new, vibrant, young congressman from Texas as the head of it. Tell us about that. Why aren't they, or are they, full-throated support for your petition for an emergency meeting?
Well, I think the good news and bad news is that Ro Khanna is exceptional in that as soon as we issued this petition weeks ago, he went on MSNBC and he said, I support the call for an emergency meeting of the DNC, the whole DNC, 448 members from around the country. But we've gotten pretty much echoing silence. There's nothing stopping other members of Congress, the Democratic caucus, House and Senate, from doing likewise. But frankly, there's a repetition compulsion here that was fully in play during the years of the Biden effort to, and then actually announce that he was going to run for re-election. So we're hearing some mea culpas now about, oh, we should have told Biden not to run for re-election. But in point of fact, the same mentality, the same careerist culture is still in place. And that's where I think the only change is going to come from the bottom up. It's going to come from us folks at the grassroots. We are organizers, civic organizations, public interest groups, those who as activists, as organizers know that the only way you get progress in this country is you raise hell. It's never given to you or anybody from the top down. And I think in this situation, if we leave the Democratic Party elites to their own devices, we're going to have a complete failure of the party to counter this very dictatorial, not only trend, but hammer coming down from the Trump administration.
But there is an insurgent vice chairman inside the Democratic National Committee, David Hogg, who is trying to wake up the party, get progressives to challenge corporatist incumbent Democrats in primaries, and they seem to be ready to evict him. What's the story? Is he supporting your petition? Tell us.
Well, he hasn't told us he supports the petition. We certainly need primary challenges from progressives to oust a lot of these corporate Democrats who are so deeply entrenched. I think there's a paradoxical situation because we want the officers of the DNC to stay out of these primary elections. We don't want huge money coming in and being dumped to support corporate candidates against progressives. So I would be very happy, given the history of the DNC and places like the DCCC, these big money outfits that are run by Democrats in Congress, they should stay out of these primaries so that people's votes can be counted rather than $1, one impact vote. I'm really struck by the memory that Nancy Pelosi went and actually campaigned and vigorously endorsed Henry Cuellar, the only anti-choice Democrat in the House, and he won against an insurgent progressive by a tiny margin. So we need to keep these powerful people who are at the top of the Democratic Party or in the DNC. I think we just need to keep them out of primaries.
Well, the DNC was very involved in undermining Bernie Sanders' campaign for president in 2016, 2020.
Absolutely.
When he was contesting in primaries. Now they're saying to David Hogg, don't you dare endorse anybody in the primary. That's not your position as part of the Democratic National Committee. My reading, and it may not be yours, Norman Solomon, but if the Progressive Caucus comes down hard behind your petition for an emergency meeting, I think the DNC would have to have it, don't you think?
Oh, I think that's right. And that goes to the point that there are so many members of the Progressive Caucus, and they do some good things, but they really are unwilling to challenge the top of the party. So I think it really comes down to this Progressive Caucus cannot be depended on unless we light a fire underneath them. That's really, I think, the takeaway.
Are you getting much press for your petition demand for an emergency meeting?
Very little. And as we speak, it's hard to tell because we're recording this just before the meeting. I think there is a resonance, though. And I think of something that James Baldwin wrote. He said, not everything that can be faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. And I think there is a very strong understanding from a lot of people that this is an emergency. And we have a Democratic Party elite hierarchy that is sleepwalking as though it's not an emergency. And that's a huge disconnect and has to change.
Well, on that note, we have to close. Thank you very much, Norman.
Thanks a lot, Ralph.
Stand up, stand up.
Ralph, you have a short note you want to make about Gaza, which we don't want to forget.
Mass starvation with babies and children suffering the worst underway. Trump, who keeps telling us that he alone can fix things, is scared of Netanyahu and letting him do whatever he wants. The European allies, France, England, and now Germany, are warning Israel that they're going to suspend some trade relations if they don't stop the genocide or the mass slaughter. And from Israel itself comes the following hair-raising comment. His name is Yair Golan, former Israeli Deputy Minister of Economy, who called out Netanyahu for engaging in killing, quotes, babies for a hobby, end quote. Babies for a hobby. And after he said that, one of many murderous attacks occurred. The Israelis bombed a home where they killed 9 children out of 10 children of parents who are both physicians with one American-made missile. That's just one of the tragedies that occurs every day, weaponized by the U.S. government, now Donald Trump, and funded by the U.S. taxpayers who are never asked their opinion on such foreign relation policies. Americans who believe in the statement, not in our name, can call the White House switchboard and register their opinion.
That's our show. I want to thank our guests again, Diana Kastenbaum, Geoffrey Fowler, and Norman Solomon. For those of you listening on the radio, that's our show. For you podcast listeners, stay tuned for some bonus material we call The Wrap-Up, featuring Francesco DeSantis with In Case You Haven't Heard. A transcript of this program will appear on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour Substack site soon after the episode is posted.
Subscribe to us on our Ralph Nader Radio Hour YouTube channel. And for Ralph's weekly column, it's at nader.org. For more from Russell Mokhiber, it's at corporatecrimereporter.com.
The American Museum of Tort Law has gone virtual. It's at tortmuseum.org. You can explore the exhibits, take a virtual tour, and learn about iconic tort cases from history.
To order your copy of the Capitol Hill Citizen, Democracy Dies in Broad Daylight, it's at capitolhillcitizen.com.
And remember to continue the conversation after each show. Go to the comments section at ralphnaderradiohour.com and post a comment or question on this week's episode.
The producers of the Ralph Nader Radio Hour are Jimmy Lee Wirt, Hannah Feldman, and Matthew Marin. Our executive producer, Alan Minsky.
Our theme music, Stand Up, Rise Up, was written and performed by Kemp Harris. Our proofreader is Elizabeth Solomon.
Join us next week on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. Thank you, Ralph.
Thank you, everybody.
Step up, I think that you should step up. Rise up, don't let the system hold you down. Stand up, stand up. Hey, you've been saying way too long. Stand up, step up, I think you should step up.